Just to have an idea of women's performance in Manipur, and if possible, developed a certain critical theories on the nature of Manipuri women's performance. We have to undertake certain background studies in the sense in which Manipur, right from the early periods, created a certain civilization of its own. We have to undertake a study of the cultural, social, and political development of the state from very, very ancient times. We could understand that Manipur was an independent Asiatic state in the past, and it had experienced certain phases of interactions with foreign powers. It had critical engagements with other imperial systems, and also at the same time, Manipur had experienced exposure to international cultural influences, both from the East and the West. How it developed into a proper ethno-state as such, and it reached its classical cultural status in the 18th century when the major sections of the population in the valley were converted into Hinduism. And after the 18th century, another 200 years, and the land became a colonized subject after having been defeated in 1891 by the British imperial authorities. And a period of colonial apprenticeship in the new modernity had emerged. 56 years of British rule, and then later after 2 years, Manipur was integrated into India in 1949, and the development of Manipur after integration into India. And these are certain political chapters in which certain impact on each cultural development and cultural expression, and in the way in which a very important section of the population, that is women, they created a sense of space for themselves. It has a very intriguing and very interesting story. I am not very sure whether I will be able to relate to you briefly in detail, but I would like to tell you first the way how Manipur, each land, the people, its geography, the climate, and the environment had created the kind of civilization that Manipur had inherited. If you remember, if you look in the Southeast Asian geography and have a sight into the northern mountains systems in which Himalaya, the eastern Himalayan ranges, had been connected with one very important geological core in the north of Burma. You have heard about a very interesting mountain called the Hakakaboraji, which has become a very wonderful tourist site nowadays in Myanmar. From Hakakaboraji, you will see the geography of Southeast Asia. And from the Hakakaboraji mountain formations, a series of corridors, a series of mountain chains have spread throughout the continental environment of Southeast Asia. And right from the eastern side, we have the chain of mountains, which is known as the chain Annamike. That is in the eastern side of Laos and Vietnam. And in the west, they have come to know about the Himalayan ranges and it's another series of mountain chains which turns along with the Brahmaputra river, and it has come into what you now constitute the Patkoi ranges, and then we have the Manipur hills, and then the Arakan Yomas. These are part of the mountain, say, 5 chains of mountain formations, 3 in Southeast Asia. And they are formed as a kind of, if you look at inverted hand, if you spread, you keep the hand like this and spread this way in 5 areas. The geography of Southeast Asia, right from the Yunnan and this mountain core, you will find that these mountain chains were accompanied with wonderful river systems. We find the Mekong, the Red River in Vietnam and Laos, the Mekong chain of rivers right from the Yunnan up to Burma, to Thailand, and right up to Southeast Asia. Then you have the Salween and Irrawaddy rivers. And the Brahmaputra, which was called Yalong Sanpo in the Tibetan language, this was supposed to have been, would have been a Southeast Asian river system along with the Himalayan and Southeast Asian ecological characteristics. But at some particular historical time, the tectonic movements in the Southeast Asian region created a diversification of the torrents of the Brahmaputra River, and it came right down into the Gangetic plains, and it merged with the Ganges and flew into Bangladesh, came down into the Bangladesh and formed, and they had its deltas in the Bay of Bengal. Within this chain of rivers and mountain formations, the mountains thriving with wonderful, colorful tribal communities, and the river systems creating certain kind of hydraulic civilizations in the which the people who have come to inhabit these valleys grasp with the reality of controlling the river torrents and created agricultural civilizations in which they formed certain kingdoms and territories, organized their social structures, and created polities, which was completed in the early periods, in the early historical periods in Southeast Asia. But in the Northeast, though the people who are of different racial and speech communities, we find in Manipur traces of ancestral Proto-Australoids, whose language we have not yet been able to decipher. And we have also traces of certain Austro-Asiatic matriarchal societies who have joined into this milieu. And later periods, we have the great migrations of the Tibeto-Burmans, right from the ancient past. And by the 17th and 18th centuries, when Manipur was established as a historic state with an indigenous religion, with an indigenous language, and a typical, what you call, polity structure, where there was a monarchy and a kingdom, and the whole valley and the hills were spread with their citizens, with different diversified cultural patterns and different cultural systems, which has been later incorporated into what was known as a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, and multicultural state of Manipur in the 18th century. And when the valley people in Manipur were converted into Hinduism in the 18th century, they developed a wonderful civilization with benign influences right from the Indic processes as well as from the Sinic and Chinese cultural patterns. In a certain later period of their development of their own indigenous religion, they have developed what is known as what is known as ancestor worship. Worship of the father, the grandfather, a great grandfather, and eponymous ancestors. This belief that the spirit of the dead has a very important role in your future lives, that the ancestors will bless you. The ghost of the ancestors, if properly appeased, they actually will give you a tremendous benefits in your future life. These people had, like in the other East Asian peoples, like the Chinese and Japanese and other Southeast Asians, they had also had another form of worship called ancestor worship, which was an additional what you call incremental knowledge system from what they had earlier had about a notion of fertility of the soil, fertility of the cosmos, and the fertility of the mundane. So their ancestral beliefs on fertility, which is now derived from what you call animism, a worship of spiritual beings. This is not a cult as religious masters like John Fraser had spoken about, but the cult of fertility was developed into a wonderful philosophy later on, that the valley people had quite a different approach to the way how the ancestral spirits, the way how the supernatural spirits relate to the community. They had come to believe that nature is such an energized cosmos that the plants, the waters, the stones, the houses, the trees, and every being on earth has life. It has energies. And these energies has to be cultivated, appeased ritually for your food production, for your biological reproduction, as well as for your future welfare and security. These are combined into the formation of what is known as a Meitei religion, indigenous Meitei religion, which was developed into a powerful philosophical system by up to about the 17th century, when we, as people, we as a polity, they had relationship with other more benign, powerful cultural influences that are coming from the east, from China, and from the west, from India. The ancestor spirit, for us in the valley, we believe in a mythical ancestral dragon, which is not the dragons that you see in the Chinese mythology. It is neither the Viking mythology dragons that you find in Norway and Sweden. It's a kind of a combination of the dragon features with an elongated tail, and this tail and the mouth, actually it is a kind of a tail which has its connection with the mouth of the serpent dragon. And this we have discovered as a wonderful term which was being given to the tail-devouring serpent, which symbolically reflect the possibility, the power of renewal, continuous renewal of life, continuous renewal of the race, and also the continuous fertility of the soil, and the power of the king and emperor, which is also a belief system in ancient China. It has also its repercussions in a much more different areas. And this ancestral serpent dragon, which in Latin we term it as the Ouroboros. And the religion is the sole source of performance. And especially if we have to understand the whole philosophy of performance, we have to go back a little to the processes of that religion in which women was a very important component. Women's society and women's performance was a certain important component in the early periods, but equally shared with the males of the population. The kind of Please the God festival, which we call Lai Harawa, still exists today. It was created from very ancient times, and many of our ancestral gods and goddesses were supposed to have participated in the formation of the ritual. And we know that as early as the 3rd or 4th centuries before Christ, the tradition of Lai Harawa was gradually formed. It was not the actual ritual that we see today. It's a much more perfect, which are much more regulated, and which are much more organized system of ritual practice that we see in the Lai Harawa today. At that particular period, certain gods had been identified as having contributed to the formation of the material systems, the formation of the ritual systems, and the structure of the ritual system was supposed to have been created by about the 3rd centuries before Christ, when the love relationship between a goddess and a god, the union and romantic frolics between the two was such that the goddess, a very important Meitei goddess called Panthoibi. Panthoibi is a wonderful goddess. Panthoibi means who ruled in a period of plenty, who was free, who was nobody can prevent her from exercising her will. She was one of the most sung about goddess. So many praise poetries had been developed in praise of her. So this system of ritual called the Lai Harawa was here that the first woman performer, the Amaibi or the spirit medium, was the first dancer in Manipur, because it was she who, in relationship with the ancestral forces and in appeasing the ancestral forces, she used a method of movement, a dance system, a system of movement of our bodies, because in your approach to the deity, in order to reach the deity and communicate to the deity and bring his messages to the community who are their worshippers, the spirit medium, the female spirit medium, or the Amaibi is the most important, but her behavior, her actions are such that she reaches the ancestors through a process of dance, which will become a sole element in the Ras Leela, which will be constructed in the 18th century, at the end of the 18th century, when Manipur was converted into, the Manipuris were converted into Hinduism, and the production of the Ras Leela came out in 1779. Many primal ritual systems had similar patterns, similar processes, which we can produce it, or we can recollect it in a wonderful umbrella of rituals, where each of those ethnic communities, there are different ritual systems, could be put into certain categories of expression, but they are very similar in the way in which you relate to your ancestral forces. But as I have said later, it remained the production activities, the economic activities, and the ritual dances and music remain for quite a long time. But it changed dramatically with the conversion of the valley community of the Meiteis into Hinduism. How, in what way, the Meitei community were converted into Hinduism? Was it a total conversion? Or was there a presence of the initiative of the indigenous religious principles of the Meitei community, which was harmonized with the incoming religion, and certain processes of compromise, harmonization, and adaptations have taken place? In the later period of the 18th century, the nature of the drum performance has transformed substantially from the heavy, traditional, long, elongated drum, which was used by the male performers in the ritual worship to the deities. It has been cut down to size, in a particular size, which you can hang in your body, and in complete unity in the movement of the body and the drum, the structure of the performance, the structure of the male Sankirtana dance forms has been enhanced by the particular use of his drum and the vocabularies of the drum that has been sophisticated much more qualitatively. And here, what did the drum and what did the ritual symbol and its musical harmonization actually mean in the theme of the appropriate preliminary ritual? In traditional Meitei religion, and the traditional Meitei religious traditions like the Lai Harauba, the community who have come to perform the Lai Harauba ritual system, a very interesting episode of the community is organized one day after the spirits of the deities are brought to the ancestral presence, and the early images which is ordinarily there in ritual in our daily life, the images have been infused with life by the action of the ritualists who are bringing the spirits from the water, and they enter into the imaginary ancestral space. They are protected from evil, any kind of evil dimensions which can hurt the pristine soul being transferred into the images. And the images are images are infused with the soul that is being brought from the river. This kind of Thawai Hapa, a kind of infusing of life into the image of the deities. This is a very interesting ritual custom of the indigenous Meitei religion. So when the Ras Leela is to be performed, what actually is the theme of the Ras Leela? It was taken from the classic, what you call Ras Panchadhyay, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Canto 29 to 33, 5 chapters, which has to be visualized in the whole the Ras Leela performance, the unity, separation and unity of the male and female principles. What was important was that in the Lai Harauba system, the day in which the Lai has been brought from the waters and being absolutely the images that have been there in the community has been brought to life, and after he is having been brought to life, you remember that the Lai will now behave as the human being behaves. That this is an anthropological, theory, which is known as systematic anthropomorphism, in a sense in which any kind of nature's products, any kind of spirits, or any other thing, when they are being brought into contact and communing with the humanity, he also becomes part of the human society, and he behaves, he eats, he sleeps, he makes love, and he has all that kind of activity which the human does. So in the Lai Harauba you will see the first day will be period when the Lai Ikowa, summoning of the spirit of the Lai, is being performed, and it was a rest day. And that night he will eat and sleep, and next day in the morning the fiddle player, the pena singer, will sing beautiful lyrics of the advent of dawn, the behavior of animals and birds, and he will plead to the deity to kindly await, because it is a time that your community, your people will come to pray to you, seek your blessings and all these things. He will be baited by the ritualist of that particular period, and then he will commune through the spirit medium with the community that has come. That was a very interesting ritual system. And the second day, what will happen is the entire people who have come shall celebrate along with the deities, inviting all the evil forces, the sarois, the guardians of the directions, and the gods, and many others will be invited, and the community of humans will dance, they will celebrate, they will please for more than 9, 5, 7, 9, 11, up to this odd number of days. Now, in the Lai Harauba, as you see, when the Lai are there in the temple, and when the community have come, and they have come with beautiful movement, wonderful dance steps in which the females, the elder females, then the married women, then age grades, the virgins and the little girls, each will form a wonderful processional, a kind of a procession in which they present themselves for service to the Lord and the Lady. And the rituals will be organized in the temple, and the priestesses or the amaibis will try to get the soul of that spirit, the life of that spirit, right into her navel, and they will bring it into the yard for their particular collective celebration of the Lai Harauba performances. Now, there in the particular period, in the second major processional ritual, the Maibi will lead in a sort of a songs, in the response music, the Maibi, the Amaibi, the Amaiba, and the Pena, three important instruments of ritual. They are very important instruments of ritual. Ritual players, men players, who are to lead the community, the throng, the crowd. In the particular ritual system, the male Amaiba will particularly take care to appease the forces of nature. He will appease the spirits of the waters for the Ikowa, and he will also create and participate with the more regularly with the male population in enacting the emergence of humanity from the bowels of the Father. This is a very interesting symbolic what you call action that is being undertaken, and this creation of humanity was organized in such a way that the Amaibi, the first dances, the first ritual elements three important elements of nature. The male amoeba representing fire, the female amoeba representing the nature element of wind, and the third, the penna, the singer, penna singer, representing the element of water. Fire, wind, and water, which constitutes the three primal elements of human life. And the two other, the sky, the ether, and the earth, the mother. These five constitutes the human soul in Meitei philosophy. And this, when we started celebrating along with our ancestral fathers and the guardians of the directions, and we celebrate the birth of the lie, the creation of the human world, and the material actions for creating, continuing, and producing life and activities. The ritual system is such that the God whose spirit has been brought into the yard, in the community yard, his image has to be built up in the crowd's imagination, in the people's imagination. The image of the deity has to be recreated, reintroduced, reimagined in the imagination of the community. So the idea of the development of the body of the life, the Manipuri term for it is Hakchang Sagatpa. Hakchang, body, Sagatpa, formation. The formation of the body, which was the way how a child is born and how the first head falls into the earth and how the child has been formed within the structure of the womb of the mother, and the embryological processes was down south into the community celebration in which the body is recreated, the body is bathed, and then the body becomes mature, and he and she has got life, and then there is life, romance, and marriage, and sex, and the activities of the creation of the world, the activities of whatever life functions in the world, these are all danced out in the huge ritual system. This idea of the image being created is now transferred in a subtle way within the Sankirtana tradition, when the male group in their imagery produces a kind of a ritual performance structure in which, in their mind's eye, they presume that they have built up the image, they have called up the image of the Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in whose mind's eye the entire play and drama of the god and goddesses, the love between the Lord and Lady and the gopis of Vrindavan, are being visualized. But I want to enter into the way how women is in performance. The structural changes that have taken they're taken in the later periods, and in what way women's performance is to be understood. We have to understand that the palace, the presence of the deity's pavilion when the Ras Leela is organized, you will have to take into account that the Gobindji temple and the royal court at the central place is regarded as a replica of the ancestral heavens. The whole panorama of man's relation, human's relation with the transcendent absolute, it has to be performed. And it has to be structured in the way in which the dances are structured, in the way it was described, with all the indigenous interventions, with all the liberties in the formation of gestures, in the composition of movements. These are all wonderful forms of bodily expression which has meaning, which has symbol, which has interpretive understanding of the processes that are being undertaken when the bodies of men and women are being organized, and extra daily performances, extra daily gesticulations and articulations are exercised, which became an aesthetic classic in the later periods of our life. The nature of the costumes that are being worn was an imitation of the mythical Vrindavana ladies. If you see the gopis and their costumes in the 18th century, you will see that the way how an event of cosmic love are being visualized in a particular sacred present in our lives, the community are to be not witnessing but participating and praying in the event, must have an environment of purity. There must have an environment of non-sexual attitude to the whole organization of movements. The women's costumes are veiled, and the women who are gopis had breast straps, which was white breast straps, which was in order to restrict the movement of the upper and middle portions of the body and relieve it from any kind of extra mundane approaches by other male populations. And the nature of the costume was definitely not what we are seeing today. The costume has its own development and philosophy. It is from the original imitation of the Gagra in the past was gradually to be restructured in the way how the costumes of the spirit mediums were organized, and it has become gradually expanded with the circumferential kind of exercise. That was a very late period in which this system has developed. But 18th century, if you look at the sculptures of that period, if you look at the dances, imagine the dances of that period, and if you look at the literature that has been produced, indigenous literatures that had been produced at that time, and the actions of the individuals, it was like the Kangla, or the central power center, was transformed into an imitation of the heavenly abode of the ancestors. And how do we approach the ancestors? Not directly with the God. There is a belief that after all, your personal liberation with the relationship to the God can be an individual experience, no doubt. But how do the individual approach the deity? How do the individual approaches the genuine transcendent soul? Absolute. It is through the medium, as I have said, it is through the medium of the priestess who has been responsible for the communing of the ancestral powers, unseen powers, with those of the mundane world. So that was a kind of a graded system in which spirituality is exercised, and a graded system under which you find methods of personal liberation through the support and through the intervention of these grand spectacles, where the performers are the spiritual messengers to reaching the entire ultimate transcendent absolute. So this Ras Leela, therefore, is a work not only in Vrindavan when the event has happened, but also it was an area, a space where the ancestral deities, they do definitely join and participate. It was a very aesthetic and a very spiritual space that has to be worshipped by believers. And why the Ras Leela is not to be watched and observed, it is to be participated in, is a very important ethical norm that is still continuing today. How do women participate in the whole cosmic exercise by themselves, on their own, supported by the fellow male accompanists, etc.? How did women perform in the court was one solid aspect. The other one is like in Moirang or in Kaching or other areas where the indigenous gods and goddesses were still alive, where there was tremendous excitement with their own indigenous deities. There are two important phenomena that we are now watching. One was how ritual performances are organized in the court and how ritual was expanded in every month, every date of the birth of the deities, Hindu gods and Hindu goddesses, and certain activities of the common people in their articulation of certain more expressions of in their relationship with their ancestors, in the rites of passage, in the birth of children, in the marriage of adults, and the death of their fathers and grandfathers. These rituals are being organized under Hindu traditional norms, and the ritual system have expanded for the converted population. But even though many of the common people have been converted into Hinduism, as you have noticed, as I have told you before, about the compromise between Hindu philosophy and indigenous Meitei religion, Meitei religious philosophy, and the ancestral gods and goddesses are still having influences on the actions, behavior, and practices of the people. But unfortunately, any kind of women's creative, innovative, and any kind of interactive activity by women was not possible in an extremely orthodox Hindu society in the 18th century. So whatever the women performed was in the court and approved by the court, approved by royalty. Another women's performance alone was organized, which became known as Raseswari Pala. The Pala, the chorus, and the operatic form in which the ladies earlier waited for the preliminaries to begin. The male Sankirtana group has not yet, or what you call, stopped the structure of the Ras system. But after the males have brought in the image of Lord Gauranga, it was nobly handed over to the ladies. The ladies, after sitting first, they stood up and started their songs, their prayers, along with the appropriate rhythms and ragas and whatsoever. They completely stopped any kind of enactment of the core principle of the rasa exercise, the bhangi, the act of union between the Lord and the lady. That was beautifully, ethically, and morally disowned. It's a very interesting exercise. The Raseswari Pala is a very interesting exercise that the women had an opera of its own. It has a structure. It was 2 times in a year. They performed in the Astakal Seva in October and once in November. So it was a ritual women's own performance. structurally dependent on the Ras structure, but avoiding the main core themes in the Ras structure, and therefore making themselves completely independent of the entire the niyams and the laws, customary traditions of the other system. So women has started exercising their own volition within the structure of performance. In women's performance, therefore, there has been changes and transformation in the ritual system. And this Raseswari Pala was followed in 1845, in the middle of the 19th century, with the Jalakeli Pala, which was another women's performance. Bones were dug, and the imaginary performances of the divine place in the different geographical areas of Vrindavan and others. It was being imitated by different lineage with their own lineage girls. So Jalakeli is digging of a pond, and from that pond, the waters being washed and bathed together for the Lord's union. This was again introduced during the period of nursing as a lineage line independently. And you can see something that is developing is that each action, each episode, any kind of stories in which the great Lord Govinda's relationship with the devotees and with his what you call Supreme Radha, any kind of function and event became a theme for development of a performance form. It was interesting, two important genres of performance were introduced through the auspices of Lord Gambhir Singh. The one was a singing of the Dasapata. It was a kind of collective movement in lines, and sing the Sanskritic, Bengali and Brajavali voices, and the simple, slow, dance-out rhythmic movement in the community. The way how the Dasavatar was expanded and reintroduced as a worship form in the ritual during the Ratha Yatra festival. Other genre of performance known as Kubak Isai. Kubak Isai is a kind of a freer form of performance, the sheer rhythmic clapping music. See, they sing the stories from the Krishna stories, and they will dance out, and this became very, very popular in the later 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, this idea of a theme becoming a genre of performance again was seen in the inauguration of what is known as the Basok of today. Basok is actually the story of the Lady Radha waiting for the arrival of Lord Krishna, and the anxieties in the way, the trials and tribulations of the lady, and finally how he united with her, having undertaken a great apology because Radha was absolutely angry of his antics, his mischiefs. And this story, the Vaishnava traditions of the definition of women's role, women's character, and women's expression of rasa in the system called the Astanayika. The story of the angst, anguish, and the elemental fury that Radha experienced in the wait for the Lord. The wait for the Lord, the nature of anger, the man, and refusal to accept him. These are the stories which became a powerful medium of women's performance in the presentation of the Basok Sajja. So these things have origins, connections, and a particular character in the way in which women actually gave added their contribution to the spread of the religion. But along with the spread of the religion, one thing very particular that we have to undertake to see is the gradual decline of the position of Manipuri women in Hindu society. The men's power, after a series of wars, after a series of victories, and after a series of human muscle that has been organized in the warrior state, had created a certain space in which women's earlier independence and earlier autonomy was gradually undermined by the Hindu philosophy of the image, the teachings, and the laws of Manu. Within the palatial household, there was also a revolt taking place in the construction and generation of the Ras Leelas. The organization of what is known as the Nitya Ras or the daily Ras, which was introduced in 1904 by a princess called Sanatombi, who was married to a Western political agent. If you remember, she organized, not in the palatial capital, not in the Govindji temple, but outside of that, at the house of the political agent. That is a governor's residence today. That is where she exercised a new rasa, claiming why rasa should belong to the nobles alone. Why should rasa be belonging to the nobles and princes and princesses? Why not the common people organize rasas on their own when they wanted to celebrate the divine union of the Lord and the Lady? So the Nitya Ras, the everyday Ras that was organized in the political agent's bungalow with an artificial pavilion being constructed, but being participated by the women of the royalty at that particular period, the royalty which has been undermined by the political authorities, and the royalty, another lineage which has been appreciated and uplifted by the royalty. This crisis of clans and lineages was also reflected in the way in which Sanatombi, Princess Sanatombi, designed the Nitya. And you will see that the Kotumbi, the kind of conical cap that was used as a veil, the veil was removed, and the breast strap, which undermined the natural body of the woman, was completely discarded, and a new kind of decorative wear, a new kind of decoration of the body of the woman was seen in the costume of the gopis. And since 1904, the modernization of reorganization of the 18th century Raslila structure was transformed in the 200 years that took place. That is in that way that how Sanatombi was reacting to the system that is going in, and how she looked at tradition. Without breaking the tradition, can there be structural transformation in the way you look at tradition, how you treat the body of the woman? These are the things. Perhaps she could have been very well advised by her paramour. It could have been done within the context. We don't know at the moment, but we know that sheer transformation was taking place in the socio-economic and the political structure of the state, the coming in of the British imperial power in 1891, and the breakup of the polity, the dislocation in the traditional authorities, and also a complete reorganization of the laws and systems of justice. These are things under which changes, protests have come to the imperial colonial authority. The clowns that have come out, the Phagis, the Sumanglelas, the plays that have come out, they started new forms of operas. And the women who were unaffected by the economic transformation, because if you look at the economic and social history of Manipur, there was a tremendous, crisis when in 1892 the British Empire forced the introduction of the Indian rupee into the Manipur economy, discarding the earlier small coins and exchanges that was taking place, along with the traditional barter system that was taking place, and Manipur economy was integrated into the colonial economy without any political or social restructuring within the imperial tradition. So this kind of indirect rule also affected, and the global depression in the 1930s and the tremendous scarcity of cash in the families when money economy was introduced in 1992 created a tremendous crisis in the new generation that is growth. Within this changed cultural structure, hybrid performance forms as a necessity in the earning of livelihood came up, and a new performance form called hybrid dance system, the other countries' dance, a mixture of Manipuri dance along with the Kathak and other sequences from Bharatanatyam, etc., was introduced with a new instrumental accompaniment. And the women started dressing in the gagras, great gagras, and like they were just knots, if you remember. That was a period which was so interesting in the history of women's performance. They were so free. They were able to be free because they have faced a new audience, and they had to popularize their body's performance to the new community, which has been coming in along with the colonial intrusion. And they were charged by the new middle class in 1935, after the emergence of civil societies and the rich middle class at that particular period. They said, oh, our women have demeaned themselves. In 1936, the Marbag Jagoi was banned by the King Churachand Maharaj, and it was reported by the civil society called Nikhil Hindu Manipuri Mahasabha in their second meeting at Silchar. So what was happening was that it has a wonderful positive effect on the introduction of the proscenium arts theatre. Because if you remember, in the history of Manipuri proscenium art theatres, women's roles were taken by males because of the many prejudices of the time. And what happened was that these women who has experienced the Marbak experience, Marbak Jagoi experience, they being chided, being rebuked, and being completely, excommunicated by the new colonized middle class, they became great thespians of the proscenium arts theatre. This has created a resilience of indigenous art. And the Moirang Sai, the song of Moirang, the folk operetta, it was a tremendous placement, a tremendous statement of intent by the Moirang girls, by the Moirang women and other girls who followed their brothers and who followed their uncles in the Pena tradition. And using them, they started singing in the operatic manner with a style and a presentation of their own, in which Piliam Jati, she was one of the most important veterans of the women's Moirang Sai tradition. She started acting out the stories and episodes in the life of Khamba and Thoibi. And this 12th century story spread by the Pena players. And this story acted out by the courtyard players. And this story kept in literature since 1899. This integrated pattern, which became culminated in the later historical experience of the Manipur people, was gradually filtering into the consciousness of the people through colonial subjugation. And this rising of self-consciousness and identity of the Manipur people through their art, through their culture, through their dances and music, and etc., which are still strong, these are used by the women as part of their self-empowerment of themselves. And the Moirang Sai is one of the best instances of women's folk operetta, not the Hindu operetta as we have seen in the royalty, but a kind of smaller opera which generated from the folk traditions and which became a powerful exercise in the post-war periods and right up to the 1960s, 70s. And it has vanished. It has a few practitioners who remain, and in the next future, perhaps, in spite of many efforts during the period of tourism, this art may be extinguished. I think we have to rethink in terms of how, in what way, the people's art could be regenerated again by our conscious practice and institutional expertise, which are very much needed today.